Hello and welcome to the third episode of the original Transplants podcast. I'm Will.
I'm Sarah, and together we're the stewards of Satoyama Homestead in Warwick, Chester County, Pennsylvania. Our agenda for the third episode is going to be pretty similar to the first two. We're going to start off with some basic information about Satoyama. We'll give you a poultry culture chicken pullet update. We'll give you an apiculture, apiary, and bee update. We'll talk about our homestead chores for the week. And then we'll go into some ag news analysis.
And we're really glad that you've decided to spend your time with us because you could be listening to anything else and you're listening to our podcast, which is really cool.
So thank you. So again, before we get too deep into the agenda today, we want to remind you that you can find us online at satoyamahs.org. You can find our Tumblr with photos as well as a transcript with show notes for this show. We link to reputable references for all of our wild claims. That will be posted at our Tumblr site, spreadcast.tumblr.com. And you're listening to this episode of our podcast via SoundCloud. Look for the SoundCloud Satoyama Homestead account and the set for Original Transplants podcast. Without further ado, should we talk about the chicken update for the week?
I think you should. It's a big deal.
Sure. So in episode 2 from last week, we forgot to say it's July 18th, Saturday, July 18th, 2015. Yes. A week ago, when we discussed the chicken update, the check-in with chickens, we said they had made a major breakthrough, and they had. They had discovered our cultivated raspberry bramble. And, you know, we've been living in peace and harmony with that for the past week. What I haven't been able to harmonize with is the fact that this week they've made yet another breakthrough, if not a breakout, which is that they actually crossed the road. Yeah. And that's no joke. But we're going to discuss the chicken crossing the road joke in a second. So, yes, there was some point at which I think I was working on a weeding project, so I was probably down on the ground, you know, with my back turned. Will was working on the patio project, which, again, you heard about a bit in episode 2. We'll give you an update this week. And he yells across me, "Hey, Sarah, look who's over in the neighbor yard." And I look over, and I see 4 chicken butts. Yeah. So there is no overhead cover in our neighbor's yard. There's really no forage that they wouldn't be able to find here. I just, again, to get back to the joke, can't imagine why the chickens would cross the road.
And you kind of taken it personally.
A bit, right.
Yeah.
Trying not to, but certainly.
Yeah.
Because you think you provide for their every possible want and need, and there they go, crossing the road.
Feed them raspberries out of our hands.
Built them a chicken tractor condo.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they got a stiff scolding and were carried unceremoniously with great indignity across the street by the humans and put back in the coop. And since then we've pretty much curtailed their free range time. It used to be I would wake up, I'd get out of bed, and before I even made the humans breakfast, I would be going out feeding the chickens and opening up their coop and letting them have the run of the yard. That's no longer the case. They're now under supervised visitation with the yard.
Maybe describe what the yard is and the limitations or lack of limitations to the chickens.
To their free movement?
Yeah.
Sure. So I think as we've described in episode 1, we have a 2 1/3 acre lot of which I would say about 2/3 is probably wooded, which they haven't really discovered yet. The remaining third of the lot started as turf lawn. We've slowly colonized it with the biointensive kitchen gardens, with our Bisha medicinal herb spa and pollinator garden, with some other beds of combined edible and otherwise native perennials, and then with letting our no-mow lawn go to meadow throughout the season, which we're going to describe more in a bit. There really aren't any fences. They're sort of a decorative post-rail fence, nothing that would contain a chicken, and we don't clip their wing feathers or their flight feathers or anything like that, so certainly nothing to restrict their free movement.
Nothing.
What we were hoping is that there were enough enticements on our side of the street, be it cover, shade, sources of water, sources of food, both, you know, sort of purchase rations as well as the berry brambles and the bugs and the grass and all the diverse lawn weeds and all that, but it did not suffice. We also, when we had company yesterday, found them in the drainage ditch along the road, so they hadn't actually crossed the road, but they were tiptoeing up to the line, so we sort of had to give them another talking to, bring them back to the coop, and they're actually still in the coop today because we've been in and out of the house. We've been out berry picking. We fed them some berries, but we really haven't had the dedicated time to be out there supervising their every move. So they're restricted right now to the chicken tractor condo, which does have an enclosed 12 square foot run underneath, which is the minimum recommended space allotted for chickens. So they have the nesting loft area, the roost, the main floor space within the coop that's enclosed, and then the enclosed grass turf run underneath.
So how much, in terms of real estate in there, between the bottom, this 12,
well, the bottom's 12 minus the hatch, really, which is 2 feet. So we'll call that 10 square feet. The run, again, because they can't technically fully use the square footage under the hatch, we'll call that another 10 square feet when everything's opened up. The nesting loft area is 3 by 1, so that's another 3 square feet. The roost, which they all fit on, is essentially 3 feet of roost. So
yeah, they got a good, nice space.
They have adequate space. They can flap around. They can't really run. That's the main thing. But honestly, when you observe their behavior in the yard, when they do have free range of motion, they don't do a lot of running. They do some running from point A of cover to point B of cover. But in between those brief sprints, they are sitting, dust bathing, napping, and eating, all of which they can do within the chicken tractor condo.
Walking across the street.
Which brings us to some history and analysis of the joke. I did some very cursory internet research, so I'd love to delve more into some reference works on the history of humor.
But nobody puts anything that's untrue on the internet.
Of course not. Why would you? Okay. And of course someone's overseeing the entire operation and make quality control online. So obviously we have,
This is all fact.
Yes.
Absolutely.
But I saw multiple references, perhaps all to the same original erroneous reference, but multiple references to the fact that this joke was originally published in a New York monthly magazine called The Knickerbocker in 1847. We'll link to some versions of the joke that were published there in our show notes when we get them posted at spreadcast.tumblr.com. There are some very interesting interpretations of the joke. And of course, I should explain I'm referring to the joke, why did the chicken cross the road?
I would hope everybody's heard that.
Why did the chicken cross the road?
To get to the other side?
Indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
So there you have the anti-joke interpretation, which says this is in fact not a joke, but an anti-joke because it doesn't offer the typical surprising, novel wordplay punchline. It offers a literal explanation for why a chicken could cross the road to get to the other side. So that makes it an anti-joke. That's one interpretation. There's a second sort of existential, metaphysical interpretation, which is that there is, in fact, wordplay in the joke, and that has to do with the phrase, the other side. And that if you think about the nature of roads and human travel on roads, which could be threatening to the life of a chicken, the fact that the chicken crosses the road to get to the other side has been interpreted as an existential, suicidal decision on the part of the chicken, and the other side is interpreted as, in fact, the other side of the life-death boundary and not just the other side of the street.
A veil of tears.
So that's the existential, metaphysical interpretation of the joke.
Pretty deep.
I'm here to offer perhaps a third interpretation.
Yeah.
I haven't done enough research to rule out whether someone else has already presented this interpretation.
Antithesis.
Synthesis. Potential synthesis for these explanations is that they're both true. Oh. It is an anti-joke in that chickens literally cross the road to get to the other side. And it is also metaphysical in that it is a commentary on the chickens' their knack for just living in the present and having very few predetermined actions, very few expectations for the future, very few desires that they pursue in any strategic way. It's simply that was the trajectory in which they were heading, and there was a road, and their trajectory took them across the road in the present moment. So I think chickens are actually sort of very mindful and maybe perhaps small b Buddhist in that sense, that they are so in the present that when presented with a road, there's no other possible alternative except that they're going to cross it because that's on their trajectory in the current moment.
I like it.
Thank you. So that's our chicken update. They're doing very well health-wise. Your family was here last night and hadn't seen them in what would you say, 4 weeks,
yeah.
about a month, and was really surprised at their size. They still have a nice, really healthy sheen to their feathers. We've seen no issues with any kind of mite infestation. The only minor infestation they've had in the coop, so I've been really vigilant about cleaning this out when I clean it every other day or so, is earwigs living in the straw in the nesting boxes. So, it's just a matter of sort of dumping them out. The birds don't seem to mind or even have noticed, and I wonder really if they would eat them if they did discover that they were there. I don't know. I don't know. They do like to eat the Japanese beetles, which is good.
I want to do one thing. This is unprofessional for a podcast. I'm going to put the mic on top of the pad. Okay, sorry for the interruption.
All right, I think that concludes the chicken update and the why did the chicken cross the road joke analysis. Would you like to do an apiary update?
Yeah, apiary is kind of quiet. Because of the weather, has still been kind of rainy, thunderstormy, and sometimes cool actually for July. I haven't done an inspection in we're going on 2 weeks. Tomorrow is going to be sunny and 93 degrees. My guess is the bees will all be out of the hive, which is a great time to do an inspection. But other than that, everybody seems to be fine. The slime mold we talked about in last week's podcast did not advance into the hives. Right. Which was good, because I know that if I was living in a hive or in a house, I would not want slime molds trying to creep in on my honey. So that's not going to happen. So I cut the grass around them, which is getting too long, and because plants transpirate, which is where they the leaves of plants and the vegetative matter of plants will give off water as a byproduct, I believe, of photosynthesis or something along those lines. Right.
It also helps keep them cool, which is an interesting parallel, because obviously humans and many other animals perspirate.
And so do bees, which is why when you get near to the hives, you can sometimes smell bee funk, which is pretty distinctive smell.
They need some deodorant.
Okay, and they that completely just crossed into my mind and just completely eliminated my thought. I was talking about the getting the grass clipped back from the hives, because they're sweating, the plants are sweating, it's hot out, so they need to have as much ventilation as possible, because part of their honey operation is actually reducing the nectar and dehydrating it down to honey. True. So nectar starts out.
I read is it that it must remain 19% water, or they need to remove 19% of the water?
I think it's more like 80-20 to 20-80 is what they do.
Yes, but which is more, the nectar or the water? Or the sugars of the water?
They dehydrate it. So the nectar is mostly water when they get it, and then they put it in the cells, and they flap their tiny wings and make like a ventilation current that goes from the top of the hive to the bottom of the hive over it, and then they'll reduce it down to about 20% water, 19% water. I think the honey crop that I got was more on the watery side, because I can notice it in the jar, but I think that also might be the nature
what was
of the
that
honey.
Low viscosity when it moves pretty fast as opposed to high?
Yeah, and that worries me a little bit, because I don't want it to ferment, but on the other hand, one of the rules you look for when you're taking the frame of honey out is, does it rain? Right. Which is where you turn the frame on its side and shake it a little bit, see if there's any drip drops coming out of the open cells. And I tried that out, and they say 75% of the comb needs to be capped over with wax, which is what they do when the honey is done drying. Right. And so in general, it seemed like most of them were capped when I pulled them off. So it's probably on the wet side, but we're also giving it away to people, and they'll use it pretty fast and
in small portions. Yeah, we're giving it away in small. What
jars.
Are they? Maybe.
We're using it in
like
cooking.
4 ounce. I think they're 4 ounce jars. So.
Yeah, and we're using it in cooking. We're using it in drinks and stuff. I imagine we're going to use
it in those baked beans in place of maple syrup. It was really good. The cider beans. Yeah.
So anyway, long story short, I haven't looked at them. I'll probably look at them tomorrow, see what happens. Bee inspection is very dependent on the weather. You can't do it in the rain, because they'll get angry. You can't do it when it's cold, because they'll get angry. The general idea is you want to do it on the warmest, sunniest days, so that you can put your bee veil on and your long sleeves and sweat buckets.
But you assume most of the foragers are out. Most of the newly hatched is doing orientation flights.
Yep. Right. So you kind of get them when nobody's home.
Right. Typical
Yeah.
B&E.
Robbery, yeah. Yeah, that's what we're doing.
B&E.
Yeah, B&E.
Sorry.
You're really on with the B puns today.
Hey, last week it was bee robbing, and this week it's bee funk, deodorant, and B&E. So.
Yeah, I like it. So yeah, that's bee update. Nothing special going on there.
Great. Well, I think that concludes then poultry culture and apiculture updates,
Yes.
which moves us into chores.
Yes.
Do you want to go into talking about the patio project, the current status of the patio project, which we started talking about last week in episode 2?
We did. I was deconstructing it last week, and had gotten stung by wasps, and there was a black rat snake, and in general, our old patio was infested with critters. So
I have to interrupt you here because one thing that I will miss in the construction of the old patio was the
I know
big,
you'll miss it.
the hollow rebar stakes that were used would collect water, and we actually saw a pigeon sipping water out of the hollow rebar.
chickens.
The chickens with the
Dandelion,
water out of the
yeah.
hollow rebar. We also saw, because the wood was so rotted out, there were leaf cutter. Was it bees?
Yes.
Or leaf
Yeah.
cutter bees who we saw bringing portions of leaves back somewhere under the wood there. So it had become quite the habitat, which, was obviously to the detriment of the safety, using the steps and the patio as
Yeah.
a mode of transport from the ground to the house.
Which you kind of need in order to get in the front door. So,
Yeah. So we know we've disrupted a lot of that. As we discussed last week, you avoided the use of any kind of insecticides or other chemicals, and used some more natural methods to great personal peril to eradicate the hornet nest. It was probably European hornets we later discovered through some research.
Okay, yeah. So, boiling well water does wonders against a lot of different pests.
Yeah,
So.
including poison ivy.
I have to put up that post with the pictures I took of it. Anyway, so I built the steps going up to the patio, and we're mostly done the actual patio border, which used to be these railroad timbers, and now it's these 2x6, or not 2x6s, 6x6s,
Hardscaping
pounded
timbers.
together. Yeah, pounded together with rebar, filled up with gravel. So yeah, probably just a couple steps away from that being done, which is nice.
Pun intended. Haha.
Right, steps. I gotcha. So it's in good shape. I mean, I guess the only problems I ran into was getting the weather to cooperate. Didn't want to start that when it was raining, and a couple smashed fingers later.
Yeah, bruised hands
It's
from
a lot
the
of
sledge.
sledgehammering. We have I've realized we have an 8-pound sledgehammer. We could probably diversify our sledgehammers at some point, because I realized I'm like swinging this. It's a big head on that thing, and that's how my finger got in there.
Sure.
Got cut up. So anyway, I was just thinking about that.
Yeah,
Be kind
homestead
of
tools
thing.
is definitely a topic for a future episode. We can talk
Definitely.
about some of our favorite tools, or talk about some seasonal
Tell you,
tools.
you know what came in handy was that mallet I made.
Oh, talk about your mallet.
Yeah,
It's awesome.
I love that mallet. I took a piece of, I think it was white oak. Was it white oak?
Or was it that birch that we got from?
I don't recall where it was from. It's around probably about 4 to 5 inches in
Of
diameter.
hardwood.
Some kind of hardwood. So I cut it into a mallet size, which I would say it was about another 7 or 8 inches
Of round.
long. Yeah, of the round branch. And then I took a sucker off of, I think it was a maple tree. So I didn't feel like I was damaging the tree too much, because they're also invasive, those maples. And I cut about a foot long length of that. I drilled a 1-inch hole all the way through the mallet head, and then did a wedge with a sliver of wood into a slit at the top of the handle.
So you inserted the handle like you would for an axe replacement handle.
And it's worked. It's had a couple hiccups. I think I might need to soak it.
I was going to say, you also then soaked the entire
Soak
assembly
the heck
in
out of
linseed
it
oil
In linseed oil.
to keep it swole.
Boiled linseed oil. Disclaimer and safety note with linseed oil: be very careful with it. Keep it in a ventilated space. It will spontaneously combust at a very low temperature. I think it's like 110 degrees or something. It
Wow.
will explode, and that can be caused. And also, if it's in any kind of confined space, so. If you
Piles of
use
rags, that's a big one.
If you use a rag and you just throw the rag into the side of the garage, you might blow up your garage. So be very careful with linseed oil. But if you do it right, don't blow your house up. You end up with a sweet mallet that's, I don't know, it's pretty cool. And I use that to like level out some of the timbers.
Sure.
You can't pound the rebar or anything with it because it would go right through the softer wood of the mallet. But yeah, that thing came in huge amount of handy. Plus, you look like John Bunyan or something like that running around.
Yeah.
With that mallet. So yeah, that was good. And yeah, I mean, we're almost done.
Yeah, it's looking good.
A couple
and there
weeks
was
in the making.
A little scope creep, mission creep. I've asked that we'll use some of the leftover timber to line the Bisham medicinal herb spot because it's actually creeping out over the driveway there.
Yeah.
So it'll be good to create a little bit of a raised bed there, create an edge to the garden, and then, that will take us into the driveway resealing or resurfacing project either this fall or next spring.
Yeah.
Note my excitement.
Yeah.
So, excellent patio update.
Sure.
Related to your work on the patio and those other chores, we had some mint that we had transplanted there on the one side to try to implement some erosion control of part of the garden bed there. And I had to harvest a lot of that to create some space for you to be able to work, to remove the steps, etc.
Yeah.
So what did we do with all that mint? Some of it we dehydrated in the solar dehydrator that you made last year and then sort of reconstituted this season after it sustained some damage last year. So we're going to post a link to the community that you purchased the plants from and also the food safe stainless steel screen that you need within the dehydrator assembly to put your food on.
Big shout out to those folks whose names I cannot remember, but
look for them in the show notes when we post them to the spreadcast.tumblr.com site.
Awesome people, and they'll answer any questions you have about building your dehydrator. They answered a couple questions I had. And
we should say you made some modifications because I think their original model is really meant to be set up and left on site. You've modified ours so that I can easily deconstruct it, put it in the garage, and then reassemble it, on the deck or wherever the sun happens to be shining when I need it. So we dehydrated, or I should say I dehydrated a lot of mint in that solar dehydrator.
Yep.
I also froze some in ice cubes, which came in handy when we were making some beverages. I made some swatches of mint stalks and hung one in the kitchen, one in the bedroom, and one in the bathroom. So they're kind of an interesting visual element as they dried out. And as you walked by, you could kind of get a whiff of fresh mint.
Smelled it, sure.
So that was nice. So we did make really good use of that, I feel, and good use of the dehydrator.
Yeah, because it was basically spilling over the patio all that
Exactly.
night, so we had to get rid of some of it.
Exactly. In terms of other food preservation, we've started, putting up for this winter a little bit, especially because with some of the work that we've done for our farmer neighbor, he's sort of been compensating us in auction produce and his
kind,
surplus, in kind with surplus auction produce. So we had tomatoes, one case we sauced, another case I made bruschetta, and we've canned both of those.
That was so good.
Right now we have some cucumbers, which I didn't get to come up at all this year, so I'm hoping to do some dill pickles with those, which is exciting. And then we have this nice sort of virtuous cycle going with the berries. We're going to give a bramble update in a second, but we're harvesting basically 1.5 quarts every other day of berries. Mixed berries, and wild and cultivated.
That is, as we said this morning, just sort of half-heartedly going to it. Like, we're not even picking things clean. We're spending like 45 minutes
to an hour every other day.
To an hour just out there picking, and you get what you can get. You don't reach very far. I mean, it's
honorable harvest, anything that's already sort of been nibbled, I leave for the wildlife, or if I do collect it incidentally, then we give it to the chicks.
Like that turkey.
Anything that, exactly. We saw a turkey in the wine berries the other day.
Yeah, they eat the berries.
Eating the wine berries. Anything that's demonstrably a habitat. You see some spider webs in there. There's a variety of sort of invasive fruit fly that actually has an ovipositor that can lay its eggs inside the raspberries. And then the eggs hatch and you get these larval worms for the fruit flies. And it's probably not great to be cultivating those, but I don't particularly like eating the berries once they've been inhabited by the fruit flies. So
I will eat any of them, including
wormy berries.
Yeah.
And to me, that's forage for the spiders, which are a beneficial species, so it's all good.
It's all good.
So in terms of a bramble update, as we were trying to say, we are seeing now the wine berries are sort of waning. I don't know if they'll put up another crop this year or not, but they're pretty much dying back post-harvest. The wild blackberries are now coming in, and some of them are frankly enormous. They're like the size of the top knuckle of my thumb. I mean, they're huge. It's amazing. The bees really did some nice pollinating work this year.
What's funny with the bees pollinating those brambles is you can tell when they just sort of missed one.
Right.
But they're very much like feast or famine. They'll go to one place if they like it, and then you'll just find another patch of some kind of berry, and it'll be barely pollinated at all. And those patches near the actual hives, those berries are so big they're weighing the bush down.
Yeah.
So they've definitely been drinking it down, and that's probably what our honey tastes like, is bramble.
Yeah.
You know?
So that's great. Those are the wilds. And then we're still getting cultivated red raspberries and cultivated gold or yellow raspberries. And now as this first crop is waning, we're starting to see the flower buds and opening flowers for the second crop. So we'll do some pruning over the next couple weeks.
Round 2.
And what we've been doing is we've got this colander, which again holds about a quart and a half. We fill that every other day. Sort those, put all the good edible ones into the fridge, and then whatever is left in the fridge that we haven't eaten from the previous harvest, we again sort. Anything that's getting kind of on the softer side we'll give to the chicks, and anything that we can save we're sorting into separate bags: wine berries, red raspberries, and blackberries, to do some jamming.
Jamming.
And I'm really excited because my brother is planning to come out and spend some time with us either late July or early August. And one of the first things he said, based on what we did last year when he hung out with us, was he wanted to do some more jamming and canning.
Oh, I remember that. He
Yeah.
doesn't like the seeds in it, so I remember you guys...
I got a strainer kit.
You got a strainer kit
Yeah.
this time, so he's really going to like that.
Yeah, last year we had strawberry. We still have frozen strawberries from this year. Oh, we're now seeing more flowers in the strawberry patch.
Yeah, which I didn't expect. I knew you had the everbearing,
Yeah.
but for some reason I just that surprised me.
And maybe
Cool.
2 weeks ago I gave them a compost
Yeah.
treatment from our compost tumbler. I spread what had matured and we started a new batch. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that had anything to do with it. You said you had noticed some vegetative growth on them. And
Oh, they're much bigger,
Yeah.
more robust than they were, because they got clobbered over the winter, or last winter with all that snowpack.
yeah, although we straw mulched them pretty well.
We did. I might do more next time.
Yeah.
Although I don't know if it'll help. Right? I feel like they're going to die back in the winter anyway. The
Yeah,
strawberries, you know?
they do a bit.
Yeah.
The other thing that's hanging out in the strawberry patch is a second generation of baby cottontail rabbits.
I'm a little bit worried.
So we're keeping an eye on those trends because, again, we have a huge influx of what I would consider to be prey species. We've got the turkey chicks, which are now getting older. We've got our own chickens. We've got numerous mammal woodland creatures, whether it's, I've seen voles, we've seen chipmunks, we know we have mice. We've got the groundhogs.
If you're really carefully listening during this podcast, you might have heard blue jays out, and
Right.
the blue jays had flight.
Baby songbirds.
Yeah.
Yep. And now a second population of baby bunnies. So we don't know if that's going to attract predator species or if it's going to cause a competition problem for our food sources, our autotrophic food sources. So we're just keeping an eye on things.
Yes.
All right. So that's takes care of bramble update and food preservation. We also wanted to give a no-mow lawn update. This week we did some maintenance on I did some maintenance on our mulch paths. So what we do there, we explained, I think, in our first episode about the no-mow lawn and the fact that some different parts of the yard basically go to meadow throughout the season. And we manage those by scything, but in between scything rounds, they get a little bit tall. So we've put in both some mowed paths, which we mow with our real push mower.
Real.
And as well as some mulched paths, which take us to the more primary points of interest, down to the pole barn, over to the shed, down to the berry brambles, etc. And those are mulched with in-county local wood chips. And we learned sort of in the process of implementing those last year that one of the best ways to sort of maintain the path over the long term is to actually put a layer of newspaper underneath. And we've taken the extra step of soaking that newspaper in white vinegar, which is sort of a natural acidic weed killer. foliar application, right? So you're putting it on the leaves of the weeds or the plants that you're trying to kill. So once we trim down the grass really short, we put down this layer of vinegar-soaked newspaper. That's, in theory, killing the vegetative foliar growth on the plants.
Yeah.
And then over that, we pile the wood chip mulch, which, again, obviously prevents sunlight coming through, prevents airflow, should hopefully further kill back the plants, but then eventually does become a habitat for new seeds to sprout in. So it's sort of an ongoing process.
Shout out to Consumer Reports, who had an article on herbicide.
That's right.
Where it was
borax, vinegar. We have it right here on the fridge. I'm gonna go up and get it.
So yeah, we're always looking for some kind of organic herbicide, something that won't affect the environment too negatively. Something that's also easy to get when you go to the grocery store, and that isn't your genetically engineered herbicide.
So this is from Consumer Reports, unsolicited endorsement, submitted by reader David Stone from Sophia, West Virginia, and he calls this the DIY herbicide. 1 gallon of vinegar, 2 cups of Epsom salt, and a 1/4 cup Dawn dish soap. You can probably use any kind of soap. Pour in a sprayer and spray on weeds. It will kill them as well as Roundup does. And then they have some commentary on glyphosate.
David the Stone. Thank you, sir.
Yes, exactly.
So yeah, that sounds like a good one. I mean, we haven't mixed it up yet, but we will see if it works at some point.
I'm sure it's going to work better than the straight vinegar, which is what we've been using.
Straight vinegar works. It kills them back a little bit, but nothing significant.
Exactly. You'll see regrowth, especially with things like dandelions that have a nice deep taproot.
Yeah.
So we did some work on the mulch paths. I also did a little bit of scything because I had to mow the paths for when our company was here. I wanted to make sure that they were able to safely and comfortably navigate the yard. So we did concentrate more on using the reel mower to maintain those paths. But I did some scything of some of our meadow areas. I also did some weeding. We tried to plant that wildflower garden this year, and I think our seeding coincided with that sort of mini drought that we had in late May, early June, and we just weren't diligent enough about keeping those seeds moistened. So what we ended up with was mostly grass, which crowded out any of the wildflowers that did try to come in. So just this past week, I tried to weed out a lot of those grass colony patches and put down some cover crop of Dutch white clover. So hopefully those will come in and continue to kill back the grass in the no-mow lawn. I also this week did some poison ivy patrol, I call it. So if you'll recall from episode 2, I was just getting over my annual poison ivy debacle.
Yes.
This week I wanted to go around throughout the yard again because we were having company and make sure that I pulled as much of the poison ivy plants as well as Virginia creeper and another plant that has a similar growth pattern and a similar iridescent reddish greenish oily sheen to its leaves. The leaves themselves are more of a heart-shaped, serrated or toothed on the edges. I haven't identified it, but it gave me bad juju, so I just decided to pull it.
This is a suspicious looking weed here.
Exactly. So we pull those. I was also, when I had some time, pulling the invasive multiflora rose and also the ragweed. You know, the ragweed comes in along our gravel driveway.
Everywhere.
But I just try to keep it out of the yard. It is an allergen for a lot of people. And so I try to keep it away from the house anyway.
It'll spread like crazy, too.
And it'll spread a lot, yeah. But in terms of poison ivy patrol, Will had already done his round earlier this season, so it was frankly my turn. And the plants were definitely coming in, and the concern is, as we discussed last week, poison ivy puts out berries, which the birds consume, and then redistribute throughout the landscape, and that's how you end up with the plants spreading when they're not spreading through root runners. So Will developed, based on some, again, internet research, personal protective equipment, PPE, for poison ivy patrol. And that involves vinyl or latex gloves on both hands, over which you apply plastic bags. And we found that the smaller plastic bags that come with, you know, your newspaper on a rainy day or from the produce section in the grocery store works. And then you secure those at the elbow with rubber bands. That's over long sleeves. Of course, you're wearing long pants, long socks, sturdy hiking boots or shoes. And the understanding is that you're going to significantly launder, if not burn, all of these things, you know, when you're done.
Yeah, you'd think we were working with Ebola or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, we just use any kind of box or container that we can dispose of that we have around and go around and essentially pick those plants that are going to cause contact dermatitis and discomfort if you come into unprotected contact with them.
Yeah.
So that was part of the no-mow lawn maintenance chores this week. Scything, mulch path maintenance, and poison ivy patrol. I also wanted to give a garden and edible landscape update. So we already talked about the bramble update. I wanted to let folks know that we had our first small tomato harvest. We had, I believe, 1 beefsteak and just a handful of Principe Borghese little plum tomatoes.
I like those.
Me too. That's the heirloom variety. Yeah, and they're supposed to be really good, low water content, really good for dehydrating and making sun-dried tomatoes. That's what they were developed for.
Oh, okay. You see those in the jar.
Yes.
Like they're small like that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we had a few of those. We do have some, as Will said last week when we were discussing the ag briefs, and there was a bull that had chased a suspected burglary suspect through a pasture.
Right.
And your quote was, and maybe someone said it before you, that the farm defends itself.
Right.
So this week on our container Cascade cherry tomato plants, we've seen some tomato hornworm, which will just completely defoliate tomato plants. It's a green caterpillar-like bug.
Nasty.
But there's a wasp, a parasitic wasp called the braconid wasp, which will lay its eggs on the hornworm, and then they hatch into larvae, and the larvae actually digest and consume the worm sort of from the inside out. And we'll post some pictures at our Tumblr, spreadcast.tumblr.com. But basically, we have 2 hornworm specimens that we're sort of monitoring out here on the container garden, both of which have been infested by braconid wasp eggs.
So it puts its eggs into it, and then they feed on it? Or?
Yes.
Oh, man.
And then the wasps will hatch out.
That's disgusting.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
We also wanted to mention that we've got some peppers coming in, both the hot and sweet varieties, so we're keeping an eye on for when those are ready. And we're keeping an eye on the garlic. This is the first year I really put effort into growing garlic.
Yeah. I
think our first year that you were here, I kind of waited too long into the season and then planted some cloves of store-bought garlic that had sprouted greens, and they sort of came up. We had a little bit.
We did.
But going into the fall, I actually purchased some garlic sets and planted them in the fall at the proper time, and they sent up beautiful greens.
What do they look like when they're the sets?
They're just cloves of garlic that you break apart. Or bulbs of garlic cloves. Garlic cloves that you break apart and you plant the cloves.
You plant them like individually?
Yep, cool. About 10 inches apart.
Okay.
You want to, plant the largest cloves if that's what you're going for, its size, and then you can eat the smaller cloves or use them in canning or what have you.
Got it.
So, as I said, they put up great greens. I think some of them were actually green through the winter, and we had mulched them really well, so that's supposed to help. And then we had scapes earlier, late spring, earlier this summer, which we used on pizza.
Why don't
we
you
used in some noodle
explain what a
bowls.
scape is? Because you kept saying to me, why don't you cut some scapes off? I was like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Botanically, I think it's the flower, I'm not 100% sure, but it's basically this growth that will emerge from the center of the garlic leaves. And it's on a long stem, and they're absolutely delicious. They have this very green garlic flavor in the same way that scallions have a very green onion flavor. It's a little milder on the garlic, and then you get that meristem green flavor of that fresh plant flavor.
And what are they, like 4 feet tall?
They're really tall now. You're supposed to harvest them sort of upon emergence when they're fresh. Ours are getting ready to bloom now.
Yeah, in fact, one of them, like you said, one of them already has.
Yeah, and I'll say when you leave them on, that's supposed to reduce the size of the clove. So we did harvest some, so that should keep those cloves at a nice large size.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's really an agricultural reason to let them bloom, but to me, again, getting metaphysical, I sometimes wonder whether plants have will's power or sentience or, a desire to live, to spread their seed, to reproduce, an awareness. And so, letting them have their roots in the ground. Sometimes I wonder about container gardens. Is that like confinement? When you have a plant by itself and it can't tap into that mycorrhizae network to interact with other plants, is it in solitary? This
is the only podcast where anybody will ever bring up Nietzsche and plants in the same thought. So, just be aware. Original transplants.
All right. And so I let some of them flower because to me it's honorable harvest, right? Sure, my cloves are going to be a little smaller, but the garlic plant got to live out its garlic plantness.
Yeah.
is how I
there
feel
you
about
go. I like it.
it. All
Yeah.
right. But I did want to give an
Well,
unsolicited...
we did chop half their scapes off and the other half
Yeah,
let them go. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Because as we've described previously in terms of the honey harvest, all the living things here pay some rent, including
yeah.
us. We've got
Pay rent.
sweat equity in the homestead,
Yes.
and the other living things. We collect our cut.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I wanted to give an unsolicited endorsement for Mother Earth News article from the current issue, which is the August-September 2015 issue. Oh my gosh, August-September. It's going to make me sentimental about back to school time. This looks like it might have been reader submitted again by Roberta Bailey, and she has a brief bio at the bottom of the article that she's grown garlic for decades on her 18-acre farm in Maine, which is surely a vampire-free zone by now. I just love agricultural jokes, as you might be able to tell. So she gives some advice in terms of harvesting, as well as, again, clove selection for replanting. You want to plant them in the fall. Select your biggest cloves, or you can purchase cloves that are specific for planting. 10 inches apart in rows at least 1 foot apart. I actually put ours in a border around our bio-intensive kitchen gardens because they're supposed to detract certain kind of pests, predators, and vampires that don't like the garlic scent. Yeah. So I don't do rows for various reasons, and that's one of them. And then again, once you've planted them, you want to make sure that you're mulching them really well.
So this is cool. So what you're saying is you got a clove of garlic from the store for planting. So you plant.
No, that's not how you're supposed to do it. That's what I did year one. I didn't do that intentionally. What happened was we had store-bought garlic and it started to grow green leaves. So at that point, it's not really great for eating. The clove itself is usually fairly desiccated. So I figured, what the heck? Let me put it out in the bed and see if it comes in. And it did. So
then you planted, we had one clove. You planted all the little, where we had one head of garlic, you planted all the little cloves this year. So now we have, 10, 15?
I'd say we have closer to 2 dozen.
And each one of them is going to make a head
Each of those is a bulb, a head of garlic that has multiple cloves. So we'll be able to select the very best cloves to plant this fall. Yeah. The rest of it we can consume, put up, can, etc. And the other cool thing that I read about garlic, I believe this is in the Edward Smith, The Vegetable Lover's Bible Guide, is that it, like most other living things, adapts to your environment. So by purchasing plantable garlic, which was bio-intensive varieties, and planting those cloves and then collecting the very best specimens from each harvested bulb of garlic and planting those cloves year after year, we're going to end up with a strain that's optimized for our microclimate, our soil conditions, our sun conditions. And we'll see what happens from there. But so that's something very cool about garlic. So this is a seasonal thing. Ours is, I have this thing about waiting too long to harvest things because, again, I like them to be able to maximize their time in the sun, so to speak. But I think in terms of the leaf dieback and yellowing that we're seeing, that I don't want to wait too long. Our garlic's getting ready to harvest, and it's about the right time, talking mid to late July. So I'm excited about that in terms of a garden update. I believe that concludes all of our homestead updates, and that'll be taking us into the news, unless you have anything else.
No, I really like the virtuous cycle with the garlic. All right, Lancaster Farming. As usual, we like to read selections from Lancaster Farming, although this week we brought in Mother Earth News and Consumer Reports, so we're really diversifying here.
True.
So this is the Saturday, July 18th, 2015 version. We have an article right on the front page by our favorite staff writer, who has a byline on every single article on the front page, Philip Gruber.
Busy guy.
Shout out to Philip Gruber, who's writing nonstop apparently. All right, so the name of this article is Studying Speedy Bee Helps Cut Its Pesticide Risk. So this is Biglerville, Pennsylvania.
This is also the beginning of a 2-article bee theme.
Yeah, that's true. Biglerville, PA. The Japanese orchard bee may be the hero of Adams County apple industry. This small, fuzzy insect pollinates about 80 blossoms for every one a honeybee visits. Unlike the honeybee, the Japanese orchard bee has solid resident populations in Pennsylvania. So honeybees are not native to Pennsylvania. They come from Europe, where they were domesticated thousands of years ago, and that's their native climate. So any honeybees that are living in the wild here are
Escapees.
and invasives, and this one is also an invasive. So what the article goes on to say, Sarah Shugru, a Penn State graduate student, gave a talk at the State Fruit Research and Extension Center's Grower Field Day. And so she talked a little bit about how honeybees are having problems with colony collapse disorder. So orchard owners are relying on native bee species in order to pollinate fruit. Now, the funny thing is they mentioned native bee species here, but this Japanese bee is not native. So, unlike honeybees, Japanese orchard bees basically just belly flop onto the flowers, and their fuzziness helps them collect pollen. It's solitary. It lives in naturally occurring holes. Nest boxes can help promote the bee's reproduction. It rarely stings because it doesn't have a hive or honey to protect. And Shugru found that the bees were often only exposed to pesticides at a tiny fraction of the applied rate of neonicotinoids, which a lot of research has shown may cause problems for honeybees. So because of the way this bee nests, because of the way it visits flowers, it's actually something that orchard growers are looking into trying to promote some more, because
So are these populations there pre-existing, or are we talking about potentially importing or breeding more?
so they've kind of taken Pennsylvania by storm. So as the name implies, the Japanese species is not a native species. It was imported 40 years ago to pollinate apples and has established itself rather well here, is what Sarah Sugar said. So it's an invasive bee, but it doesn't seem to have the same. It doesn't sound like it's
unintended
so prolific.
consequences.
It's not driving out other native bee species. And so actually, I don't know what this looks like. They don't really show a picture. So I'm actually interested to know what it looks like. Some of these other bee species look very different from the honeybee species. So
yeah, if you flipped over to page 821, we'll continue with the bee theme.
yes. So anyway, I'd like to make a habitat for them.
Absolutely.
At some point, it'd be interesting.
Yeah.
So this is tagged bees cause a buzz in disease research. This is the Ag Science News section. This is from the American Association for the Advancement of Science. So James Cook University researchers have glued tiny transmitters to the backs of insects for the first time. Wow. So just imagine them. How do they do this? Well, we just had to hold them in our hands and hope the glue dried quickly. It was actually quite a process. They had to be individually painted, then individually fed, then the tag glued on. I guess if I had a tag being glued to myself, I would want to be fed too.
Yeah.
Scientists injected half the insects with a low dose of Nosema spores, a gut parasite common amongst adult honeybees, while the rest remained disease-free as a control, I guess. Using the RFID, so radio frequency identification, RFID tags in combination with observations of the hives and artificial flowers, researchers were able to see how hard the bees worked and what kind of material they gathered. We knew the dead bees couldn't forage or pollinate, but what we wanted to investigate was the behavior of live bees that are affected by non-lethal stressors.
And I want to interject here.
Yeah.
Non-lethal stressors is one of the things they think contribute to colony collapse disorder. It's often something that's not considered when insecticides and other chemicals are being tested.
Yes.
Sometimes only outright lethality is investigated and non-lethal stress is not investigated or taken into consideration. And so this could also be sort of could lead to research into management practices and other causes of non-lethal stress that might be contributing together to create conditions for colony collapse disorder.
And I put together that post about propolis and how tearing apart your beehive can cause some stress, because then they're being exposed to this non-lethal amounts of fungi and bacteria that are just in the ambient environment.
But their community immune system is compromised.
Yes, when you're
so it's like
opening them up.
any other kind of opportunistic infection.
So non-lethal stressors. I mean, if you get woken up every night at 3 a.m. and you're not able to sleep, you might catch a cold because you haven't been able to sleep.
Or go mildly insane. because you can't complete your REM cycle, right? Isn't there
Yes.
research into that? Anyway, so this, I'm really, I don't know if you have any professional ethical reflections on their methodology, but I do think it's great that they're looking into non-lethal stress and its impact on nectar and pollen collection, which they get into in the next paragraph.
Researchers say infected bees were about 4 times less likely to be carrying pollen than uninfected bees and carried less pollen when they did. Infected bees also started working later, stopped working sooner, and died younger. Wow. About a quarter of our food production is dependent on honeybee pollination, is what Dr. Lori Lack said. So yeah, James Cook University really using some interesting methods for studying bees. Who would have thought that you could glue something to a bee in order to track where it's going? I mean, that's incredible. They must have some crazy software too, because we're talking about thousands of bees flying around.
Yeah, they tagged 960, I believe they said.
Yeah, there you go, 960.
Right there.
Yeah.
But I agree. It also makes me want to add a layer to my tinfoil hat, but that's for another podcast.
Yeah, that's wild. All right, so we had some other articles.
Yeah,
here.
we're going to flip back to page A13 to do an update on avian flu preparations in the state of Pennsylvania, and then we'll go into briefs. So this is an article out of Harrisburg, PA, again on page A13 of the Saturday, July 18th edition of Lancaster Farming. The headline is, Pennsylvania puts $3.5 million toward bird flu prep, again out of Harrisburg, PA. Quoting, Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture officials have allocated $3.5 million in emergency response funding to address highly pathogenic avian influenza. Quote, while avian influenza has not been found in Pennsylvania to date, Governor Tom Wolf's administration understands the seriousness of the virus and the potential negative impact it could have on our state's $13 billion poultry industry, said Agricultural Secretary Russell Redding. And we read an article by him, I believe it was in the first podcast, about backyard poultry operations preparations for the potential for avian flu.
Remember.
Yep. So, interesting. $13 billion poultry industry, we're allocating $3.5 million in potential emergency response funding.
I had no idea that there was so much money at stake with that avian flu. They say $13 billion?
That's Pennsylvania's industry.
That's just Pennsylvania?
Yeah.
That's wild.
So, I think there have been some recent headlines regarding egg shortages and also bird culling in other states that have had outbreaks. So, we haven't seen an outbreak yet, any confirmed cases in Pennsylvania as of now, as far as I know, on July 18th. But they are preparing for the potentiality, which I think is very good.
Yeah.
Quoting further on in the article, it says the department, so that's the Department of Agriculture, is also working with the State Department of General Services to ensure the necessary state employee manpower is available if an outbreak were to occur in Pennsylvania. So again, sometimes, and I've made this point I think in every episode, there's just no substitute for boots on the ground, no substitute for people who are knowledgeable in a diversity of areas being ready to problem solve and troubleshoot conditions on the ground. Going on, again, Agricultural Secretary Russell Redding describes the industry in Pennsylvania, and again, it's valued at $13 billion and constitutes 53,000 jobs, so that's a lot. In addition to working with the other State Department of General Services, the Department of Agriculture has been working with industry members and representatives of the academic community. I imagine a lot of them coming out of our land grant University, which is Penn State in its extension office. Finally, for more information about Pennsylvania's bird flu preparedness efforts, you can find information at the department's website, www.agriculture.state.pa.us, and look for the avian influenza banner at the top of the page.
Wow.
So I think that concludes our news analysis. We had the bee theme. We had a little bit on avian flu prep in Pennsylvania. Check out episode 1 for backyard poultry operations and what we can do to be better prepared for our mini flocks. And I believe that concludes all of our chore update.
We got brief.
Oh, awesome. How could I forget briefs? We have some good ones this week, too.
Yeah,
so we're going to cover
first.
Sure, ag briefs on page A16 of the Lancaster Farming to take us out here. So we've got 2 really interesting briefs about plants that I'm going to read, and then Will has a brief that he's going to read. The first one, these are both out of the National Ag Brief section on page A16. The headline is Smithsonian Launching Effort to Capture Diversity of Plants. So this is coming from the Associated Press in Washington. Quote, scientists at the Smithsonian Institution are launching a new initiative with the U.S. Botanic Garden and National Arboretum to capture the genomic diversity of the world's living plants. The National Museum of Natural History said Wednesday that the initiative will be part of the museum's Global Genome Initiative.
Wow.
The goal is to capture samples representing half the world's plants in less than 2 years. The plant tissues will be preserved in cryogenic vials and stored in liquid nitrogen at the Smithsonian's biorepository. To accelerate the collecting of plant specimens, scientists plan to gather initial samples from gardens in the Washington area. Beginning this week, field teams from the museum's botany department will begin sampling plants from the U.S. Botanic Garden, Smithsonian Gardens, and the U.S. National Arboretum.
So isn't there also a seed storing, like,
there's a vault
up in Norway or something?
I think it's in Scandinavia.
Yeah, that's wild.
Plant diversity, genomic diversity, very interesting. And you can find a lot of interesting analyses of projects like this in the science fiction literature, so we'll leave that there.
Yeah.
The next timeline is also cool and quite related, and we talked about the history of corn in episode 1, so you can go back to the transcript and show notes from episode 1 to find some links. But this headline is 1,000-year-old corn cobs and kernels found at South Dakota site. From Mitchell, South Dakota, again through the Associated Press, quoting, archaeologists in southeastern South Dakota have uncovered corn cobs, corn kernels, and sunflower kernels that are more than 1,000 years old. And I believe when we read our Ag News in the first episode, we said both sunflowers and corn were domesticated and contributed by indigenous American populations. So quoting again, officials say the discoveries at the prehistoric Indian village in Mitchell show that people who lived in the region at that time had a diverse diet. The village is the only active archaeological site open to the public in South Dakota. Students from the University of Exeter in England and Augustana College in Sioux Falls work every year at the site that holds dual status as a National Register and National Historic Landmark site. Augustana archaeology professor Adrian Hannes told the Daily Republic that the new discoveries indicate the village dwellers weren't exactly primitive. He says it was a successful village of farmers, hunters, and foragers. And that's something we've been talking a lot about recently is the human diet and what agriculture and settlement did to the human diet, and whether as essentially apex predators in the environment, we should be a little bit more migratory than we currently are because of our grazing impact on the environment. And I think that it's interesting that this archaeologist makes the distinction between a primitive culture and a culture that has this hybrid nutritional model of foraging wild foods, which we're big fans of, obviously safely, using your field guides and good plant identification technique, but we're foraging wild foods, cultivating native edible perennials, farming. Obviously, you have your breeds of edible plants that you've selected through breeding and specimen selection and seed saving for positive traits regarding human sustenance, and then hunting, right? And, performing your role as the apex predator in the environment and relying on other heterotrophs to make up part of your diet. So I found that really interesting. Again, the history of corn is pretty cool. You can find some links to references from our episode 1 transcript at spreadcast.tumblr.com. But this hybrid model of agriculture, hunting or animal husbandry, and foraging is, I think, where we need to think about the future of feeding human population.
So 1,000-year-old corn, so a little bit of salt, a little bit of butter,
a little bit of heat,
maybe some pepper.
Nature made it delicious. We just heated it up.
Yeah. So international ag briefs. Polish cow on the run for 2 years caught. So this is Warsaw, Poland, from the Associated Press. Matilda finally moved.
Oh.
They put the pun in there, wasn't me. Moved back home.
Thank you, AP.
So Matilda. The cow escaped from her Polish farm 2 years ago and lived a life on the lam in a nearby forest, sometimes damaging crops. She has finally been caught. Owner Leszek Zasada spoke about his adventure with the brown cow in a story broadcast Tuesday by the all-new station TVN 24. He said Matilda escaped in 2013 from his farm in Złotostok in western Poland the day after he brought her home. Wow, that's cold. He brought home the cow and she just was like, bam, I'm gone.
Yeah.
I'm done with you. She survived 2 frigid winters on her own, but the time took a toll on her. She lost the calf she was sometimes spotted with and returned home with many scars. Farmers in the area complained about the damage she caused, but nobody was able to catch her until last Saturday. So the only thing I think this brief is missing is how did they catch her? That's what I want to know.
I agree. Did they use a bull like that one time? Is this a reversal?
I don't know. Or like some delicious food, or did they just open the gate and she just walked in the front door? I don't know. But yeah, good job, Matilda. Good job,
Cow on the lamb.
Mr. Cow on the lamb. All right. So yeah, that's it for the ag briefs that we wanted to do.
So to take us out, don't forget, you can find your way to SatoyamaHS.org to find out more about homestead operations and our Satoyama Presents events, which are going to be starting this October, we hope.
Yeah.
You can also find more news, thoughtful analysis, and photos, as well as some videos at our Tumblr, which is spreadcast.tumblr.com. That's where we're going to post this show with a transcript and show notes and references within the next few days. And you might be listening to this podcast at our SoundCloud account under Satoyama Homestead in the set for the original Transplants podcast. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you. Bye.